special guest, Jim Smith. Jim, former Vietnam vet, and now author of Heroes to the End. Well, welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, welcome. So, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I'd like to talk about helping homeless veterans. I am the vice president of the board of United Veterans Beacon House, a Bayshore nonprofit that runs 40 homeless shelters for veterans and others. Most of them are in Suffolk, but 4 are in Nassau. And it is the premier veteran service agency on Long Island. And I've donated $12,000 from my speaking fees and book sale proceeds to Beacon House because I believe in the mission.
So what made you be passionate about this, and what is it specifically, pertaining to the demographics of Long Island?
Well, I served from 1970 to 73 and did a year in Vietnam from August 1, 71 to August 1, 72. And when I came out, I really had 3 lost years, even though I was gainfully employed at Newsday as first general assignment reporter and then sports reporter. I had a DWI conviction. I was driving erratically. I spent a night in the tank. I was passing out with my head on my typewriter after office parties. It took 3 years until I met my wife to be in 76, and she led me out of the darkness, so to speak. And so I identify with those that have mental problems. And, at Beacon House, we don't take folks who are disabled, but we do have folks who are trying to overcome substance abuse, and they have had traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, and some are suffering from moral injury in that they either did things or they failed to report things that they saw that were against their own moral code. And so now they are depressed, aimless, and so they need a therapy to get out of the rut, just like I needed the catalyst of meeting a good woman to break my cycle.
So tell me more about Beacon House.
So Beacon House is headquartered in Bayshore. We have about $7 million budget and 100 employees, growing all the time. Most of our homes are in residential neighborhoods. Our system works. We have various rules governing various houses depending on whether they're state, county, or federally funded. So at some locations, it's an emergency shelter. At some locations, the clients pay rent. At some locations, we handle older vets. At one location, we handle only females. So then we assign a house manager and a case manager to each house. And we have about 7 vehicles that can be used to take those who don't drive to their medical appointments and to receive counseling benefits and meds at Northport VA Medical Center. And so generally we shepherd them from homelessness to hopefully independent living.
Right. So what do you think has been the most challenging part for all those involved and getting the message out there about what's happening with our homeless vets?
Well, my wife is a social worker, and we have been to countless workshops and trainings, and I have also been to meetings of clinicians to discuss the problems that veterans have. And, you might wonder, how does a guy who is prompt and meets deadlines and is used to working with others as part of a team suddenly start missing his job interview appointments and seemingly needing a kick in the butt to wake up out of this lethargy that forms when one is depressed or when one is suffering from untreated PTSD. So, in some cases we have to take a tough love approach and give guys a deadline and say, we don't want to hear that excuse about my wife couldn't find a babysitter and I had to watch my son. You had a job interview and you blew it, and your job is to get yourself employed so you can take care of your family. As far as getting out the word, I think we're doing a fairly good job because we're getting a lot of corporate sponsorship for our annual gala. We have real estate companies, we have banks, we have National Grid having, job workshop days. So I think we're on the radar screen of a lot of, potential donors around Long Island. But, the problem just doesn't go away. We had a problem at Northport in January. It was single digits at night out there, and some of the union employees at Northport VA complained about the antiquated heating system in our emergency shelter, the one that we took over from Salvation Army a couple of years ago. And, this facility is about 90 years old now. And so we had to evacuate 33 people in 72 hours and relocate them among 9 of our homes. And then some of them also were Department of Social Services clients from Suffolk that were relocated under arrangements made by DSS. So
Now, these were your personal homes that you said they were relocated to?
they were relocated to some of our shelters that are in homes in communities.
Okay, gotcha.
We blend into neighborhoods, without giving any addresses. I can tell you we have a couple in Huntington, one in Kings Park. We have shelters, 2 in Hempstead, one in Levittown, one in Freeport. And they're sprinkled all over Long Island, as far east as Riverhead.
Okay, wow. What do you think has been one of the most biggest highlights in all these years that's been you considered a victory for the work that you guys are doing?
Well, I do a column called The Vet's View for 6 blank slate media publications in North Hempstead town. And so I'm always writing about, mostly about clinicians, workshops, conferences, but I would say the biggest victory was opening a home for challenged, I'll just put it that way, veterans on Depot Road in Huntington. That was an energy efficient home. And that home was built by about 40 graduates of a program that we partner with United Way of Long Island on, called Vets Build. So it was our clients, veterans, many of whom live in our homes, building the home for 6 or 7 veterans. So that was great. I wrote one column when we broke ground, and another column when folks started to move in and we had a ribbon cutting ceremony.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic. That's great news. I also wanted to ask you, Jim, what the vets themselves, what are the things that they feel more frustrated about, and what's happening in our culture, how I feel that we don't do enough for our vets in general. I get really frustrated how they're used for political gain one way or the other, right? So I would like to hear what are some of the things that they talk about and frustrated on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I would say the biggest one is nobody cares, and the VA is slow and incompetent. In other words, they blame others for their situation. There's also a lot of young vets who are sitting in their mother's basement playing video games and not reacclimating to the culture. And that's why groups such as Team Red, White, and Blue, which I've also written about, a Long Island nonprofit, arranges social events that blend veterans with civilians. And they do service projects such as Sandy Relief in Long Beach, or a covered dish non-alcoholic dinner, and a 10K walk along the boardwalk. And it's not, and the participants mingle, they truly mingle, and people show up and give these veterans business cards. I'm personally aware of a veteran who had come to me because he thought he might want to be a writer, and I had a 48-year career at Newsday as a reporter and editor. So whenever somebody wants to be a writer that's a veteran, I get him. And I can immediately tell whether he has this stuff or he doesn't by the clips that he brings. And, this kid just didn't have it. But I was polite to him, and I gave him a few tips, and I told him he'd have to start at a small newspaper. Anyway, I followed up a few weeks later, and I found out that through a friend of a friend, he was hooked up with the sheet metal workers union in Manhattan and was working on a high-rise at that time.
Okay.
So, these are the stories you hear. Guys come out of the service and all they did was spend time as a clerk. They think they can write, but they're truly not trained for a heck of a lot. But we have a lot of contacts, and there's a lot of businesses around Long Island that are actively recruiting veterans, and North Shore Hospital System, the largest employer on Long Island, actually has a veteran service officer whose job it is to find qualified veterans at all levels to hire for North Shore.
That's great. Oh, wow. Okay. Good. Now, tell me a little bit more about your book.
Well, when I was in the Army in Vietnam, I was 22, 23 years old, but I had spent 4 years at Newsday covering high school sports. I had also covered a Ranger playoff game